We're in the season of Lent. Here we are. 40 days, beginning anew, walking together, 40 days between now and Easter. What's this day and season feel like for you? Does it feel like this is a time of excitement and energy and renewal and growth and liberation? I hope so. Or does it feel like this is a season that is heavy and burdensome and filled with a lot of don'ts? If so, I hope we can reorient your thinking so you can find great opportunities and invitations here. Now, we know the usual list of don'ts, things to not do. Those can be helpful, but our faith is a lot more than a list of things not to do. Pope Francis, a couple of years ago, knowing this tendency we have to see this season as a time to let go of some things, gave a beautiful list of things to let go of. Don't gossip, for instance. Don't hold grudges. Don't be overwhelmed with sadness or selfishness or envy. It's a good list. I encourage you to read his suggestions on what to let go of. I've got a few don'ts to add to the list for this season of Lent. For instance, don't leave your sidewalk unshoveled. It's really tough for your mail carrier. Don't knock icicles off from your house while you're standing underneath them. It's just not a good idea. Don't shovel a spot in front of your house and stick old pieces of furniture on it and call it dibs. You know, there's a special place in hell for those folks. And really, don't not shovel a spot in front of your house and still put some old furniture on it and claim dibs, because there's a really special place in hell for those folks. There's lots of things we don't do and we want to avoid in this season of Lent. Those are good for us and good for everybody. But Lent isn't really about the things that we are called to not do. It's a lot more than just the things we're called to fast from. Lent, in its root, and I think its healthiest meaning, is a season of spiritual growth. Spiritual growth. Not to grow in losing weight or punishing yourself. This is a season to grow in your relationship with the divine, the holy, your relationship with God. The word Lent itself actually means springtime, when everything's coming back to life. And so I want to encourage you, let's commit together these next 40 days. Let's commit to growing together in our spiritual lives. And let's see what God can do. And let's see when Easter comes, if maybe 40 days of growing, we might not only have a deeper spiritual life, but we might have more peace and more power to do what's needed to be done. Let's have a good Lent together. The season always begins with the same story, this year from the Gospel of Mark. It begins with the baptism of Jesus, and as Mark describes it, as Jesus comes out of the water, he hears the voice of God speak to him and say, "You are my son, you are my child, and you are beloved." Immediately, as Mark likes to say, Jesus headed off on a 40-day spiritual retreat. Always a good idea for disconnecting and getting rid of the clutter and getting focused on what's important. Jesus is on a retreat, 40 days. On the retreat, he wrestles with what it meant to get this identity given to him, God's beloved, child of God. He needs to figure out what it means so that it will shape the rest of his life. So he spent a lot of time thinking about this. Satan, as Mark tells us, came along and tried to convince him otherwise, to convince him he wasn't really God's beloved, wasn't really a child of God, son of God. He was something less. Satan came along and tried to convince Jesus that he actually would need to earn God's approval, earn people's approval, that he would only be loved if he was successful. Satan tried to convince Jesus that no matter how hard he tried, it would never be good enough. There were always other people doing more and doing it better. Satan tried to convince him that God was very disappointed in him. In the stillness and quiet of that 40-day retreat, Jesus knew better. He could hold on to this identity that he received at his baptism, and knowing that he was beloved, he found great strength and energy and power and courage to go out and turn the world upside down. We are at the beginning of our 40-day wilderness invitation. We are invited in Lent to be like Jesus, to spend 40 days reflecting on who we are, what God has called us to be and to do, to see what discoveries we might come up with. These 40 days, let's be honest, Satan is working hard. It's his busy season. He knows you're trying harder, so he's trying harder to convince you of the same things. How unloved you are, not just by God, but by everybody else. How inadequate you are. How you need to earn people's approval, because that's what a successful life is. How hard he is trying to convince you that others are doing so much more. Go ahead, compare yourself with others, and realize how disappointed God is in you. He says those things to you and to me. This made me think of a book I'm reading lately by a colleague and spiritual friend named Monica Coleman. Monica Coleman. She is a Black pastor, professor, theologian, teaches womanist theology, an activist. She's a powerful woman, deeply, deeply loved. And yet, in spite of it all, she wrestles daily with depression, which she recorded in a really beautiful book, 40 Days of Readings on Faith and Depression. In spite of all of her successes and accolades, here she is wrestling with the basic questions. She writes these words: I'm an academic, I make my living off my mind, and my mind can play deathly tricks on me. I'm a minister. I tell people that God loves them and wants what's best for them. The truth is, depression can make you question everything, especially whether God loves you. Her 40-day devotional, Not Alone, talks about how hard life is, how debilitating, how exhausting when we doubt that we are loved by God, when we doubt that we are God's beloved. And she helpfully raises the question for us, what is it that's going to get us through? What is it that's going to get us to a higher place, a better place? Well, let me remind you of something that you probably already know. And that is, when you were baptized, assuming you were, God said the same words to you that God said to Jesus. You are my daughter, you are my son, you are my child, and you are beloved. I love you. You are beloved. And God, in saying those words, was saying, you do not have to be perfect. You don't even have to get close to perfect. You don't have to get straight A's in life. You don't have to earn God's approval. You certainly don't need to earn the approval of others. You don't need to compare yourself with others. You sure don't need to be better than anybody else. Instead, God said, I love you for who you are. Period. And so take that with you into the wilderness, into these next 40 days. Mull that one over. See where it takes you. See if it might give you some of that same energy and power and strength that Jesus found. This theme of being beloved leads me to my last quote, one that I have often appreciated over the years. This comes from American author and poet Raymond Carver. Raymond Carver. He lived a hard life, a lot of drinking, a lot of personal problems, relationship problems. But at the end, he found love in his life partner. And so, reflecting on what she gave to him, he wrote his final poem in his final book. And the book, the poem is entitled Late Fragment. These are the words Raymond Carver wrote, asking himself a question and then responding. And did you get what you wanted from this life, even so? I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved. To feel myself beloved on the earth. He had those words put on his tombstone. To call myself beloved. You and I have a lot of work to do. We are the church. We are called by God and sent out to be on the front lines of bringing healing and hope and compassion and justice to the world. We're called to be on the front lines of helping our own families, many of who have great needs. We're on the front lines of helping one another. Those in the church, how many are going through such difficult times? We're called to the front lines of alleviating suffering around us. People who are facing hunger and homelessness and rejection and being blamed for the suffering that they face. We're called to be on the front lines of overcoming hatred, which is big time these days in the United States. We're called to be sent on the front lines of dismantling racism, which we now see in all its ugliness. We're sent out to be on the front lines of fighting all these battles. And let's be honest, it is tough to bring help and healing and hope and justice when your tank is empty and you got nothing in reserve. Lent is the time to fill up your tank, to remember who we are, so all those people who need you can count on you to be there for them and to lift them. Jesus changed everything knowing he was beloved. Ray Carver died in peace because he knew he was beloved. Monica Coleman is wrestling and yet winning and helping to shape important conversations about faith and gender and religion and race because she continually remembers that she is beloved. You and me are sent out to do important stuff too. Whatever it is God is calling you to do, may you find the power to do it and the courage to do it and the strength to do it and the confidence to do it. If in doubt, just remember the same thing that they remembered. You are beloved by God. You are beloved by God. May it give you peace and power today and this Lent.